Yes, how you doing? What's your name?
Nicola, how are you doing?
Nikolai, good.
So I have two questions, so I just want to keep it quick. Should infertile people be allowed to legally marry?
A student steps up to challenge Dr. Frank Turek at Louisiana State University with two tough questions, one about marriage and procreation, the other about the foundation of morality. This leads to a broader debate. Is morality objective and God-given, or is it simply a human invention that evolves with society? These are deep philosophical challenges that many skeptics pose, and in this video, Frank Turek delivers clear, logical, and biblical answers. Stick around as we break down this fascinating exchange.
Should infertile people be allowed to illegally marry? Why not?
Well, if, as you say, the morality of relations in the government, so like the whole reason the government is in marriage is to make sure that we continue to produce children and therefore produce society. If the whole basis is the ability to produce children, then it would seem that people who can't produce children biologically should not be allowed to marry. And
but that's the exception rather than the rule, okay? And the reason that marriage has been between a man and a woman from all eternity, as long as civilization has been around, is to perpetuate and stabilize society. And the reason that we have a society and a civilization is because a man and a woman come together and they procreate and they nurture the next generation. When that breaks down, civilization breaks down, as we've been seeing in this country for the past 40 or 50 years. Okay? Now, just because some people who are men and women, say older people or infertile people, don't procreate, when they get married, they're still illustrating to the rest of society that a man-woman relationship is still a relationship that models what needs to be modeled to the rest of the society. And maybe one or the other of this infertile couple is the true infertile one. If that broke up, and say this man then goes out and he is the fertile one and he engages in extramarital sex with somebody else, then he's creating illegitimate children, which is going to be a problem for the children and for society generally. The best thing that he could do would be to stay in the relationship with his wife. So the marriage is not just to procreate, it's also to model to the rest of society, because the law is a great teacher that this is the way society and civilization is actually established.
I mean, I would question whether or not you could say society is heterosexual when the ancient Greeks and Romans were very famous for their enthusiasm towards homosexual relations. But on to my second question.
Well, hang on, Nikolai, that's true. But the Romans and the Greeks never said that same-sex relationships were the equivalent of opposite-sex relationships, nor did they ever say that same-sex relationships constituted marriage, because they knew that civilization could only exist when a man and a woman come together. Now, you're right, they did engage in activities that were not biblical, and that's why when Paul writes the book of 1 Corinthians, he's really going against the nature of society at that point. He lived in an area of prostitution where any Roman man could have sex with anyone at any time, and the wife couldn't. In fact, let me just say one thing about this, because I think it's an interesting observation. And a lot of you are going to hate me, but I'm just going to tell you what I think is the truth. Do you know that modern feminism wants women to act more like men sexually, whereas biblical Christianity wants men to act more like women sexually? In other words, biblical Christianity wants men to be monogamous, whereas modern feminism wants women to be non-monogamous like men. That's a disaster for civilization.
So my second question, where you say that morality is based in God, there's vast evidence of people creating civilizations like the Native Americans who, for thousands of tens of thousands of years, have never came across the Christian God, but yet they very clearly have evidence of like morality and functioning society. And I just want to hear what your response is to that.
It's a good question, Nikolai. Christians do not believe that you even need to know the Bible to know right and wrong. In the details you do, but not in the big picture. In fact, if you needed the Bible to know right from wrong, the entire generation of Noah was judged unjustly because they didn't have a Bible. Adam and Eve didn't have a Bible. Abraham didn't have a Bible. You don't need the Bible to know basic right and wrong because it's written on your heart. In fact, this is one of the arguments that Paul makes in Romans chapter 2, that the Gentiles and have the law written on their hearts. This is why C.S. Lewis could write a book like Mere Christianity and Abolition of Man, especially Abolition of Man, where he says every major culture has agreed on the essentials of morality. They may disagree over the peripherals, but in the core of it, they agree because it's written on their hearts.
So would you say that humans inherently understand morality?
We inherently understand on the big issues, like for example, as soon as you're old enough to know what murder is, you know that murder's wrong. As soon as you're old enough to know what theft is, you know theft is wrong. That doesn't mean you always behave in accord with that moral precept, but you know it. You might suppress it and go your own way. I might do that. We all do that on occasion, but we know it.
I guess why I ask this, because if Native Americans and like all other humans, we inherently understand what is right from wrong, then it seems like morality is not based in the Christian God, but instead whatever the basis for humanity is, which you can very well say is the Christian God. The totality of saying that morality comes only from God seems to be a little insufficient.
Well, where else would morality come from if it didn't come from God?
Well, if it comes inherently from humans, it could come from humanity itself.
But which human? Mother Teresa or Hitler?
Humanity is like an entire society. We don't need rules for one person, so why should one person make one rule?
Well, let me ask you a question. Let's suppose Hitler won World War II and convinced everybody that murdering Jews, homosexuals, and gypsies was morally right. Would it be morally right?
No.
Okay, so society can't determine right and wrong. Society can only discover what's right and wrong. Otherwise, it's just your society against Hitler's society.
I don't see how that answers the question of morality being based off of God, but I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, I'm simply saying majority vote doesn't determine what right and wrong is.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I'm not saying that either. I'm saying that like morality to be based in God is to like ignore basic facts that not everyone can come across God, and but everyone has morality.
Well, again, you don't need to know it's the Christian God, because before Christ ever came to earth, people knew basic right and wrong. The source is the Christian God, even though the Christian God hadn't revealed himself to the fullest extent prior to him coming. So the morality is put on our hearts by God before he has completely revealed himself in the scriptures.
But if we have the inherent morality, do we need God?
Yes, because you wouldn't have it unless God existed. Just like you can read a book and not know who the author is, you wouldn't have a book unless there was an author. Right?
Thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you, Nikolai. Good question.
The student, Nicholas, posed two key challenges. Is marriage primarily about procreation, and is morality dependent on God? These are not new debates, but they are essential in Christian apologetics. Let's explore why marriage has an objective purpose beyond reproduction, and why morality cannot exist without God. Nicholas's first question challenges the idea that marriage is inherently tied to procreation. He suggests that if marriage exists to ensure the reproduction and continuation of society, then infertile couples should not be allowed to marry either. However, this argument misrepresents the true purpose of marriage. Christianity holds that marriage is not only about having children, though that is an important aspect, but also about providing the foundation for a stable society through the union of a man and a woman. Robert P. George, in his book, What is Marriage? Man and Woman, A Defense, explains that marriage is fundamentally a comprehensive union, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, between a husband and wife. He argues that marriage is a human good with intrinsic value, regardless of whether a couple has children. It is ordered toward procreation, but its essence is the permanent, faithful, and exclusive union of a man and a woman. What is marriage? p. 41. Infertile couples still model the essential structure of marriage, reinforcing the truth that a man-woman relationship is the foundation for family and civilization. This is why marriage between a man and a woman remains distinct from other forms of relationships, even if children do not come from every union. Nicholas's challenge also assumes that reproduction is the only justification for marriage, but this is a materialist view that reduces marriage to biology rather than recognizing its moral and social importance. The second question Nicholas raises is whether morality is inherently human or if it must come from God. He references Native American civilizations, arguing that they had functioning moral codes without Christianity, which suggests that morality might be independent of religious belief. However, the existence of moral behavior in non-Christian cultures does not prove that morality is a product of human society. In fact, it affirms Romans 2:15, where Paul writes that even those without the law show the work of the law written on their hearts. C.S. Lewis, in Mere Christianity, makes this exact point. Think of a country where people were admired for running away in battle, or where a man felt proud of double-crossing those who had been kindest to him. You might as well try to imagine a country where 2 and 2 made 5. Mere Christianity, PO 5. Lewis argues that moral laws exist universally across cultures, not because society invented them, but because they are discovered, pointing to a universal moral lawgiver, God. If morality were purely human-made, then it would be subject to cultural opinion, which means that atrocities like genocide or slavery could be considered moral if a society accepted them. This is precisely why objective morality must be rooted in God's nature, not human consensus. Nicholas suggested that morality might simply arise from human nature. However, Frank Turek countered this idea effectively, using an example of Hitler's Germany. If morality is determined by society, and if Hitler had won World War II and convinced the world that genocide was right, would it then become moral? Nicholas agreed that it would not, proving that moral values must transcend society, and thus, morality must be anchored in something beyond human opinion. This is exactly the argument that William Lane Craig makes in Reasonable Faith. If God does not exist, then objective moral values do not exist. But objective moral values do exist. Therefore, God exists. Reasonable Faith, p. 173. Without God, morality becomes subjective and meaningless, leading to the dangerous conclusion that power determines what is right, a concept that has fueled tyranny and oppression throughout history. Nicholas's questions reflect common challenges in modern apologetics, but they also expose the incoherence of secular reasoning when it comes to marriage and morality. Marriage is not solely about procreation. It is a sacred institution that models the essential male-female relationship, even if children are not conceived. Morality must be rooted in God because objective moral values cannot exist apart from a transcendent source. Societies discover morality. They do not create it. For those interested in diving deeper into these topics, check out the books mentioned in this commentary, links in the description.